And so you had a text-based web browser.
Yeah.
Well, actually, the original browser, Tim Berners-Lee, the original browser, both the original browser and the server actually ran on Next cubes.
Mm-hmm.
So this was the computer Steve Jobs made during the interim period during the decade-long interim period when he was not at Apple. He got fired in 85 and then came back in 97. So this was in that interim period where he had this company called Next, and they made these computers called cubes.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this famous story. They were beautiful, but they were 12-inch by 12-inch by 12-inch cubes computers. And there's a famous story about how they could have cost half as much if it had been 12 by 12 by 13. But Steve was like, no, like it has to be. So they were like $6,000 basically academic workstations. They had the first CD-ROM drives, which were slow. I mean, the computers were all but unusable. They were so slow, but they were beautiful.
Okay, can we actually just take a tiny tangent there?
Sure, of course.
The 12 by 12 by 12, that just so beautifully encapsulates Steve Jobs' idea of design. Can you just comment on what you find interesting about Steve Jobs? What about that view of the world, that dogmatic pursuit of perfection, and how he saw perfection in design?
Yeah, so I guess they say look, he was a deep believer, I think, in a very deep the way I interpret it. I don't know if you ever really described it like this, but the way I interpret it is it's like this thing, and it's actually a thing in philosophy. It's like aesthetics are not just appearances. Aesthetics go all the way to like deep underlying meaning, right? It's like, I'm not a physicist. One of the things I've heard physicists say is one of the things you start to get a sense of when a theory might be correct is when it's beautiful, right? Like, right. And so there's something, and you feel the same thing, by the way, in like human psychology, right? When you're experiencing awe, right? There's a simplicity to it. When you're having an honest interaction with somebody, there's an aesthetic, I would say, calm that comes over you because you're actually being fully honest and trying to hide yourself, right? So so it's like this very deep sense of aesthetics.
And he would trust that judgment that he had deep down, like even if the engineering teams are saying this is too difficult, even if the finance folks are saying this is ridiculous, the supply chain, all that kind of stuff, this makes this impossible. We can't do this kind of material. This has never been done before, and so on and so forth. He just sticks by it.
Well, I mean, who makes a phone out of aluminum, right?
Yeah.
Like, nobody else would have done that. And now, of course, if your phone was made out of aluminum, how crude, what a kind of caveman would you have to be to have a phone that's made out of plastic? Like, right? So, so it's just this very right. And look, there's 1,000 different ways to look at this, but one of the things is just like, look, these things are central to your lives. Like, you're with your phone more than you're with anything else. Like, it's going to be in your hand. I mean, this. He thought very deeply about what it meant for something to be in your hand all day long.
Yeah.
Well, for example, here's an interesting design thing. Like, he never wanted. My understanding is he never wanted an iPhone to have a screen larger than you could reach with your thumb, one-handed. And so he was actually opposed to the idea of making the phones larger. And I don't know if you have this experience today, but let's say there are certain moments in your day when you might be like only have one hand available, and you might want to be on your phone.
Yeah.
And you're trying to like send a text, and your thumb can't reach the send button.
Yeah, I mean, there's pros and cons, right? And then there's like folding phones, which I would love to know what he thinks about them. But I mean, is there something you could also just linger on, because he's one of the interesting figures in the history of technology? What makes him as successful as he was? What makes him as interesting as he was? What made him so productive and important in the development of technology?
He had an integrated worldview. So the properly designed device that had the correct functionality, that had the deepest understanding of the user, that was the most beautiful, right? Like it had to be all of those things, right? He basically would drive to as close to perfect as you could possibly get, right? And I suspect that he never quite thought he ever got there, because most great creators are generally dissatisfied. You read accounts later on, and all they can see are the flaws in their creation. But like, he got as close to perfect each step of the way as he could possibly get, with the constraints of the technology of his time. And then, look, he was, sort of famous in the Apple model. It's like, look, they will, this headset that they just came out with, like, it's like a decade long project, right? It's like, and they're just going to sit there and tune and polish and polish and tune and polish and tune and polish until it is as perfect as anybody could possibly make anything.
Yeah.
And then this goes to the way that people describe working with him, which is, there was a terrifying aspect of working with him, which is, he was very tough. But there was this thing that everybody I've ever talked to who worked for him says, that they all say the following, which is we did the best work of our lives when we worked for him, because he set the bar incredibly high, and then he supported us with everything that he could to let us actually actually do work of that quality.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people who were at Apple spend the rest of their lives trying to find another experience where they feel like they're able to hit that quality bar again.
Even if it, in retrospect or during it, felt like suffering.
Yeah, exactly.
What does that teach you about the human condition, huh?
So look, so I'd say exactly. So the Silicon Valley, I mean, look, he's not, George Patton in the, in the Army, like, there are many examples in other fields, that are like this. Specifically in tech, it's actually, I find it very interesting. There's the Apple way, which is polish, and don't ship until it's as perfect as you can make it. And then there's the sort of the other approach, which is the sort of incremental hacker mentality, which basically says ship early and often and iterate. And one of the things I find really interesting is, I'm now 30 years into this, like there are very successful companies on both sides of that approach, right? Like that is a fundamental difference, right, in how to operate and how to build and how to create, that you have world-class companies operating in both ways. And I don't think the question of like which is the superior model is anywhere close to being answered. Like, and my suspicion is the answer is do both. The answer is you actually want both. They lead to different outcomes. Software tends to do better with the iterative approach. Hardware tends to do better with the sort of wait and make it perfect approach. But again, you can find examples in both directions.
So the jury's still out on that one.